This is a fight for our very existence.
Did you locate the weapon?
Yeah, it's just a kid.
Are you going to heaven?
No. You gotta be a good person to go to heaven.
So we're the same. We can't go to heaven because you're not good. And I'm not a person.
Whoever has that kid wins the war.
You guys should be recording always.
Yeah.
By the way, I know we're just jumping right into it, but have you ever not rolled? I did it on film. I did it on Garden State. I just forgot to roll one take. And I'm looking at my assistant. I'm like, I'm leaning next to the, I mean, by the way, you could hear it going. And I'm like, how the, and the whole take happened. And I had to sort of fess up at the end of it. That was bad news.
Yeah, I've done that.
Right, for sure.
When we were promoting Godzilla, I had to do this one interview with Bryan Cranston. We walked in a room, it was MTV, there was a microphone, and Bryan grabbed it and just started pretending to rap. And he did one line, and then I grabbed the other one, and I did it, and I managed to make it rhyme. And then he made it rhyme, I made it rhyme. And it was just back and forth, and it was to do with Godzilla. And it was the greatest moment ever. And we were like, oh my God, you don't need any more in material from us. And they were like, oh, we weren't recording.
Like, you haven't, Greig.
As a loader, I exposed an entire roll of film, but that was somebody else's film. So,
wait, and what, did you admit to it immediately?
yeah, of course.
I ended up doing it, and I ended up going, whenever I say it happens, like it's a reoccurring thing. But if it does happen plurally, then it's like, I don't admit it. I just say something like, I would just do one more time, we had a technical problem.
Yeah, that's definitely happened to me, not on a film, but it's happened on a commercial or something. And it's like, you don't realize the camera's already rolling, and then you click roll and it cuts. That's how it happens usually. And then suddenly you realize like, oh shit, it's not rolling now. Let me just quickly press that again and no one will notice.
Oh my God. All right, we're gonna get into this. ShotDeck, we already started talking. This is how it happens when these four get together. Welcome to another Shot Talk. And we have with us an incredible group of filmmakers for the movie The Creator. We've got the director, Gareth Edwards. We've got DPs Greig Fraser and Oren Soffer, and we're going to talk about this amazing film, which I have a small experience with Gareth, going back to some additional photography on Godzilla in 2014 or so. And I'll bring this up first, and I'll throw it to you, Gareth. Is I remember our conversation when we talked about it, your experience going from Monsters, I assume, to now a 200 or whatever it was, $150 million behemoth, and all the sort of stuff that comes with it. And I remember in that conversation on the phone before we did the additional photography, you were just like, I just remember every time I turned, there were just people and equipment and everything. And it was like, I just wanted to just, I could feel your, even then, this like desire to just have freedom again, even on a big movie. And it seems like, and tell me a little bit about, you took your experiences with that and obviously Rogue One, which you did with Greig, and now put it into something that seems a bit like every filmmaker I know's kind of dream, which is to try to control the way movies have become so big. Talk to me a little bit about the how that happened and how you got to what you did with The Creator.
It makes no sense at all when you say it out loud, is that when you have hundreds of millions of dollars, you're suddenly quite restricted in what you can do, which just doesn't add up. Like, you can say it a million times and explain it in a million meetings, and you get to the end and go, but why? And you find yourself in these situations where you've got this massive budget and all these amazing talented crew and everything, but you get very quickly boxed in to like, you're doing specifically this. And my very first film, because, you know, like a lot of people, you have no money, I ended up sort of improvising a lot of that film and being very organic. And instead of like storyboarding it and saying, these are all the shots, it was more like letting the actors have a lot of freedom. We had real people for the rest of the cast. We were in the middle of Central America. It's a science fiction film, and just shot it like a documentary in a way, and kind of moved around really quickly. And it was a very liberating experience. And I remember like when I first chatted with you for Godzilla, and I did the same thing in a weird way with Greig. We met for Rogue One, and I had all my gripes about the industry, and it had this basically a set spiel, which is, here's what I don't want to do. And I remember sitting down for a meal with Greig, and Greig goes, "Can I just say something?" And I was like, "Sure." And he said, and I don't want to speak out of turn, Greig, so you just tell me to shut up if I'm saying something I shouldn't. But you were like, "I just had this experience on a massive movie. My background was a lot smaller, more indie." And he basically said my spiel to me. And he said, "I don't know why this happens. I hate it when that happens. There's no reason this should happen." And I was like, kind of like, "Oh, you had me at hello." You know, it was like, I instantly fell in love because he was telling me what I wanted to tell him. Like, we'd had very similar problems with what, if put it this way, we've got this like century old industry, right? Like, you know, the movie making process. If it didn't exist and we had a camera and we go, I got this idea, like we shot lots of different shots and we put them together, we could probably tell a story and it might work and make sense. You would not design what we have today. Like that would not be the thing where you go, I know what we should do. Let's spend like 80% of our money on a load of people stood around watching us. You know, I tell you what else we should do. We should have equipment that, you know, we just pay for and store in a truck in case we need it. But then we'll be spending so much on that we won't be allowed to do all the really cool stuff that we want to do. And there's like there's a list of about 1 million things, and we can bore everyone with them. But it was really like a reaction to that. And each film I've ever made is trying to get back to what could be considered like a sweet spot, a good balance of, because you do a small indie movie and you're very proud of it and everything, and no one in the world's ever seen it because it doesn't have the scope and scale and spectacle of a big blockbuster. And so it feels like somewhere in the middle is this great hybrid. And at the start of this whole process, you know, that's what we were looking to do. It was like, I mean, Greig, you can jump in, but it was basically find that, you know, take all the pros and cons of blockbusters and all the pros and cons of guerrilla filmmaking, which are basically the opposite columns. You know, whatever's easy becomes hard and whatever's hard becomes easy. Just take both the pros and use those. And it wasn't as simple as let's just do a mid-budget level movie, because once you do that, you can get really easy into the trap of, we're trying to be a blockbuster, we haven't got the money to do it, and we're trying to be artistic and organic, but we've got too many things, too much of a machine, and we're not either, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean.
One of the first chats that we had, as Gareth just said, on For Rogue, you know, I mean, the backstory is that I went to meet Gareth for Rogue, not wanting to do a Star Wars film because, you know, grew up on Star Wars, and I was like, I don't want to do a Star Wars film because it's going to kill my love of Star Wars, right? So, but I loved Gareth's first movie, and I wanted to meet the guy with, you know, pineapples the size, like massive balls, that would go out to, you know, middle Central America and shoot some film by himself, pretty much. And I wanted to meet that guy. So our first meeting was kind of like, I had to sit, as you said, I had to sit down and say, listen, big films are no bueno because of this, this, and this. But what we discovered through mutual kind of therapy sessions is, you know, like that 80% is there because it's all insurance policies. You know, every department has an insurance policy, even down to the craft service probably has an insurance policy. If the oven doesn't work that day, what's their insurance policy? They probably have a backup something in the car just in case they can't make the stacks. And so we kind of went, well, listen, let's get rid of the insurance policies. We're going to lose sometimes. Those insurance policies are going to fail us. There's going to be something we need or something we want. But let's buy into the fact that we are going to fail a small percentage of the time. And with the money that we've saved, we can then go and either redo or fix that problem later or come back or do something. And so, you know, it's not an unusual mindset either. Like, it's not an unusual mindset. It all stems directly from the director. It has to be director led. You know, and we've seen that, like, you know, on the opposite end of the spectrum. We were talking about this before, but something like Oppenheimer, which, okay, sure, shot with probably the biggest camera known to man, and we shot with probably the smallest camera known to man. But the point is that I think someone like Gareth, you know, along with someone like Nolan, really just owns their decisions. They own their decisions on, this is how much set we need to build or not build. This is how much equipment we have, and they own it. And they're not reliant on other people, i.e. producers or studio accountants or anybody else, to kind of tell them, well, don't you need that just in case? Don't you need this just in case? They go, no, I'll own it. If I fuck up, excuse my French, like, then I'll put my hand up and say, I really should have got that extra lens. Yeah, I know I agreed to 3 lenses, but I really should have got an extra lens.
I couldn't agree more. And with Nolan, he established some things early that bucked the trend of modern filmmaking, which is back 25, 30 years ago and more, every movie was single camera with no second unit. And now we've subtracted the number of shooting days and added more people and more units, right, on these sort of big budget movies. And Nolan from the beginning was like, I shoot all my inserts, I shoot all my things. We don't have a second unit. And that started establishing this thing that bucked the trend up until then, right?
And I think that's a really important point, is that again, films started to get run by accountants. And I don't have any problem with accountants. And to anyone that's watching that's an accountant, I apologize if it sounds like I'm being a little bit anti-accountant, because I'm not. But when they're run to fit into a box of the amount of shoot days that you need to get, because I know I've been in conversations where people go, oh, no, we can't shoot 90 days. It has to be 84. You're like, why? Like, why? Who's signing off on this? Someone in Burbank? Like, oh, no, we can't shoot 84. It's got to be 73. Like, there's a number or some arbitrary kind of sphere that the films work in that I was really happy to support Gareth to not be in, because his idea, I think, as we hopefully know, if anyone knows anything about this film, was to go with a well-rounded script into a place that, hopefully will give us locations naturally, because that's the place that it is. And if it doesn't, well, then we'll maybe build a wall, or we'll figure out a set build somewhere else. That's like it. There are many ways to sort of skin the cat, and I think that I think he was really keen to make sure that traveling the right path, and not sort of making decisions and not fitting the square peg in the round hole just because it was convenient to the numbers people.
Yeah, and that mentality, I think, is what comes from indie filmmaking, right? Like, it's specifically that idea of, when you're doing, because I had only done small indie films before this one, like in the $1 million, $2 million range. And when you're doing a film like that, you have no choice but to live within those limitations. So you have your 20 days, you have your single camera, you have your one lens set, you have your small crew, and you have to work within those limitations. You shoot on location. And, I reckon that for Nolan, it comes from the same thing, right? Because his first film, he was up on rooftops in London shooting on location with a tiny, scrappy crew as well. And I think that, when you're in that situation, you have no choice but to own those decisions and own those limitations. And what was really cool about this was stepping into this project and seeing like, oh yeah, that's the mentality. And saying, when you have a problem, like you were mentioning, Greig, when, maybe you're in a situation where you're like, really could have used that other lens. You're like, it's too bad. These are the lenses that we have. This is the location that we have. And this is the lighting package that we selected for ourselves. So we're going to make it work with this. And that mentality, I think, and having a director who has that mentality, most importantly, is what allows this to, go the way that it did. And knowing that you're putting the money that you do have, because it wasn't a $2 million budgeted movie, obviously, you're putting that on screen. You're putting it in the visual effects. You're putting it in the costumes. You're putting it in, everything that you're seeing. And the spectacle is what is kind of, taking the budget, and not the logistics and the support and all that stuff.
And it's really important to note too that it's a bit of a fight as well. When I say a fight, it's not with one person. It's an ingrained system problem with the system that we're in, where there's multiple people at multiple levels approving things and agreeing to things and signing checks. And so if you're not allowing, I don't know how Gareth felt. This would be a good opportunity to kind of hear how he felt along the path, because I felt we had to constantly fight the system to do what we wanted to do, to use the cameras that we wanted, to use the equipment that we wanted, to hire the people we wanted. Like, we constantly had to fight against the system. And, you know, it wasn't anarchy, but it was kind of like we really needed to make sure that we kind of chose what was right for this film and not what was right for the previous film that had shot in Thailand, or the previous film that had shot, you know, on a certain rig or handheld. So it was really important to be true to that.
Well, and talk to that, because as you mentioned, all of you, it starts at the head, right? So Gareth, you set out probably when you were writing this, I assume. And the movie, by the way, if for anyone who's watching is like, well, they're jumping right into like the technique and like the scaling back the number of people and all these things. The movie has incredible scope, incredible world building. The world building is incredible and really dense and really three-dimensional and never feels compromised in the slightest. And yet, when you strip all back and sort of take a view from behind the scenes, you're going to see something that maybe doesn't feel like those behind the scenes of a normal sort of big budget science fiction movie. But talk to me, Gareth, about those early days of like, how did that manifest itself in the first conversations with how you're going to make this movie, into like the choice of camera, how you sort of, you know, proved this concept and said, I know we can do it, and here's the places in which I want to strip it back. Just talk to me briefly about how you sort of got through those steps, as you know, Greig was saying, like, what was your process and what was your pain points along the way?
Yeah, I mean, it is that thing of, you can sit and have these kind of conversations we're having now about what doesn't make sense about the film industry and what could be better, and everyone in the room will nod like, yeah, we totally agree. And then you'll meet a week later, like, that never happened. You know, it's like this. I feel like when I'm making a film, I feel like there's this giant boulder and I'm on a hill and it's going down the hill and I'm just standing there for 2 years, just holding it, and you can't leave. If you just step away to get a cup of tea or anything, it moves a few inches and you're like, no, 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 no. And you'll never get that. I haven't got the strength to push it back up. And so basically you're just constantly holding ground the whole time, going, we are not moving. This is how we're going to do it. Like, you know, be aware of this. We're not making this up. We're not going to change our minds. You know what I mean? Like, if you're in this way. And so everyone agrees with that, but then they get scared when it comes to the reality of it. And so, you know, thankfully, Michael Schaefer and Yarif at New Regency were really excited about the idea of doing this film. But again, you know, we were talking crazy talk about how we wanted to do it. And so Jim Spencer, who was the line producer on my first film, Monsters, and that was very important as well to me, was that to get someone who, he's gone on to bigger and better things since then, but who understood, you know, who knew what it was like to have 250 grand and think, oh my God, we can do anything, you know, like how that used to feel when we were young and naive. And so basically we asked the studio, can we have some money for a location scout? And they couldn't say no, really, because they were pretending, at the time they were talking like they were going to make the film. So why wouldn't you give us that money? And so they gave us some money.
By the way, it's a good way to test their where they're at in the sort of green light process.
It was like
make
a
them push
day.
a little
50
money.
million, 50 million for the location scout.
Push a little,
Yeah.
yeah, right, yeah.
And so basically we just went about doing a little test, and we didn't tell them because we didn't want to put pressure on it. But we did a location scout in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, and Nepal. And I took back then it was a Nikon Z6 with a Koa 2x anamorphic vintage lens and a gimbal, which was a new development that had just come out back then, which was 2019. And you know, the idea of having a gimbal was like, oh my God, now we can have like, it looks like a tripod when you're still, but you can instantly find shots and then just stand still, you know, it doesn't feel like a documentary, you know, it's got that cinematic quality to it. And so it felt like, oh my God, this is what we've been waiting for. And so then we went and did this trip, shot a load of holiday video, you know, non-narrative, just textural nonsense. And then cut together like a 8-minute thing, I think, and then went to Industrial Light Magic and sort of with a begging bowl and said, please, can you help prove this concept? And basically what we did, which is different to a normal film, is we just I took the frame and like in just like a few, 15 minutes would paint a really cool little image, and we'd play around. Then that would get turned into by one of the guys at ILM into a photoreal thing. Then that would get projected onto simple geometry, so it had parallax. And we did a whole bunch of shots like that, and they looked amazing value for like it just looked like you're looking at a $200 million movie. And we went and hit play on this 8-minute teaser kind of thing to the studio, and they knew how little money they'd given us, and yet we had this thing with robots and epic vistas, and looked like some strange version of Blade Runner meets Apocalypse Now or whatever. And so they were just that point were like, oh my god, we're in, like we do it, whatever, however. And that what was great about that was like, however you did that, do that for 2 hours, and so that gave us permission and a license every time someone would battle us on a decision. Not a battle's the wrong word, just question us on a decision. You could say, no, but the test, remember what we did on the test was blah 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 blah, blah. And it was a great little police badge to keep, like, to have in our pocket as everyone inevitably goes, but why are you doing it like that, and why, and that's going to fail, or that's not going to work, and all this kind of stuff.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and there's shots from it in the film.
Well, yeah, that's what. Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, let's get into some of the shot talk. I assume it's like it's some wide shots. I don't know if there's specific stuff.
Yeah, there's some wide shots. There's a big shot with this building that looks like the Atari logo. I think that was from that initial.
That's amazing.
Scout, and then the guy on the motorcycle with the bananas.
Well, we'll bring him up as we talk about that.
That aerial shot right there, actually, that is, I think, from that too.
That is, yeah, that shot on a Mavic.
Oh, you did it on a Mavic, because I was like, well, maybe you just did an aerial scout in a helicopter, but you were like, no, we can't even afford that. Because I remember scouting Thailand in a storm in a helicopter, and it was like I was like, those are I wish I had a camera that could be in the movie, and never did. It was like I have stills from it. That's it. Yeah, because it was the best skyline I've ever seen, and the best sun. So you even had a Mavic there and took it up and started looking for wide shots and stuff like that.
Yeah, I crashed like 4 Mavics. Like 3 of them are on tops of these sort of cliff edges somewhere in Vietnam and that. And so basically we had, like, when we did the scout, I mean, the scout was just a proof of concept, but then what happened is in the edit, it suddenly got to 1 day late in the edit, and I must have implied to like Hank, who was the editor on the film, that I was depressed that none of those shots had made it into the movie. And he was like, we can put them in. And so then we went through and started putting them everywhere, and I felt so much better.
All right, so then you take it from that 2019 scout, and now you go, this is the proof of concept. When you then went to like go, okay, now we're in real pre-production, and you talk to Greig, and then talk to me a little bit about the co-DP situation that happened and how it happened, and sort of where some of the transitions happened, and how'd you find Oren? That's what I want to know too.
In the bargain basement bin, like when you go to the cashier.
Yep, on the bottom of where all the $5 DVDs are. That's where.
It was the $3 DVDs, Oren. Sorry,
it was the 3. That's right.
Exactly.
Greig did this very like art house obscure film set in the desert. It's called Dunny or something.
Dune.
Dune.
It's called Denis.
and so like it was clear that Dune 2 was going to happen, and there was a very good chance in us prepping this that Greig was going to get whisked away to try and get another gold little man statue.
Wow. Listen, I'm so happy this award's up early so I can get out and get to the bar.
And so we were like highly aware the entire time that this was probably going to happen, but we weren't sure. And so basically we kind of approached all pre-production, and Greig can talk a lot more about this, but with the idea of like, we're going to have to find a DOP that can, basically be with us the entire time in Thailand. And we went through a few options to start with, and maybe we never talked about this, Oren, this is time to find out. But we talked to a few different people, and it wasn't the right fit, or it didn't work, whatever it was. And I'm so glad that eventually we landed on Oren, and Greig was like, this guy, and he's like, he's young and keen, and that's exactly the kind of people I like to work with. And And I looked at his show reel, and what you're looking for in a way, I think when you look at concept artists' work or anyone's, a DOP or whatever, is I want to look at that imagery and think, and if I had a car accident and someone said, you shot some of this, or which one of these things were you involved in? You can't remember it, but what you made one of these shorts, you want to watch something and go, I think I could have done that, or that could have been me. It's got my voice, or it's got my language. It looks like the sort of thing I would do. Like, it isn't, but you're looking for someone who's got your similar handwriting, and I saw in some of Oren's small, like shorts and things that I was like, oh, that could be Greig, that could be my film, and it got me excited. And then Greig, you can tell the rest, but it was like, okay, let's have a chat.
It was definitely an interesting process building up to it, Larry, because we one thing you must know about Gareth is that Gareth is not an orthodox director. In that there's a lot of things that Gareth does that some directors don't do, and I say that in a good way, not negating anybody else. Or like Gareth would want to operate as much as he can, and I understand why. Being an operator myself, I understand the difference between a shot from here and from here is the world, right? So there are times to embrace operators, and there are times to operate oneself, which is, coming from Australia, I've always operated my own camera. So I understand when if I was operating a camera on Rogue, and I could feel Gareth sort of watching the monitor, I could feel that same energy that you probably felt when you go, all the people, like there's a certain kind of like a frustration, and I give it off too. If I need to operate a camera, if I need to pick up that freaking camera because it's not quite working, it's not a blight on the operator, it's not anything except that it's got to be, I've got to do it, and Gareth's very much that. So there are a lot of things that Gareth does and takes control of that a normal director or a director who's not operated before will do. So the type of DP that was required for this film was somebody that was happy not to operate or to have an operator work for them, but was happy to kind of guide the process in the movie. And for me, it was a real learning curve. Like what I said before about making sure that you fight the certain battles. There are certain battles on a film of this size that I had to fight. Along with Gareth for the studio. Like one is the camera type, because we talked before, the test was done on the Nikon, but in that 3 years after that was shot, or 2 years, the Sony FX3 came out. I tested that and was blown away by that. And we realized that we needed to shoot this camera this film on a camera of that size. Like you could say, well, what about the next size up? The Alexa Mini is really small, right? And it is. It's really small. Except what it does is it changes the size of the gimbal. Then that gimbal changes the size of the crane, and then it changes the amount of people required to do it. There's a kind of a knock-on effect. And, having to be that person that was able to kind of like just whack all of those kind of things that came at us. Well, what about this? What about that? Why don't you use that? And Gareth and I did have some sort of some deep conversations going, are we really sure we want to shoot this film on that? Because this is what it means. Like this is the ramifications of the bit rate and this and that. But we're like, well, that looks good and it feels great.
So when did you test that in situ? And what did you reverse engineer? Like again, I wondered the same thing. Like I could put the Venice 2 in Rialto mode and put some sort of thing on Gareth's back, or like did you go through the process of reverse engineering based on the gimbal that you were interested in, Gareth, knowing that you were going to operate the film?
I think the Venice won't do 12,800, will it?
Okay, so then that was reverse engineering into that, right? Because you were like, that's a key component to what we need, right?
But also, it requires the backpack, like you just said.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to Asia in the last 150 millennia, but it's rather hot. And so the idea, again, this is what it comes down to. Some hard decisions need to be made. And then you ask yourself the question, Larry, and go, but why? Is the Venice 2 with all that rigmarole and the fact that you can only go up to 5,000 ASC, 6,000, whatever the ASC is, in the backpack, and then somebody required to rig for the backpack, and they take that off Gareth each time, and then he's exhausted because after an hour of using it, he can't operate it anymore. So there's a knock-on effect. And you say, well, versus the image difference. And I'm going to be honest with you, I really love the FX3 visual. Image-wise, I think the FX3 for this film, I don't think the Venice was the right camera for this film, even if there's no backpack.
Yeah, or like you say, a mini LF or whatever it is. Yeah, right.
Even if it was the same form factor and the same ASA, I actually don't think the Venice was right for this film. I think the FX3 helps create the look of this movie in the right way, not just because of the form factor. I think it was really much, it created a certain look and a feel.
People bring up the price tag of the FX3. Like, I don't know, can't remember exactly what it is, but like under $4,000 or something. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And then let's pretend an Arri, what is that, like 80? I don't even know. Okay.
50 to 80, let's say, yeah. Somewhere in that range,
80.
yeah.
If the FX3 was 80 grand and the Arri was 3 grand, we would have paid 80 grand to have the FX3. Like, it's the better thing for what we were doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't about cost saving. It was about the methodology. And I think we all really did just kind of fall in love with the noise level at 12,800. Like, there was just something about it that Sony, I think, were frustrated with us. Like, they were like, what is it about it? And we kept trying to explain to them, like, it's a subjective thing. This isn't a technical thing that we like. It's technically a flaw, the noise level at the higher ISO. But there's something about it that just evoked these 1970s sci-fi films that we loved and that we were looking at for reference that have that grain. And it was just, it's like Greig and Gareth were saying, it was just the right thing for this. And it might not be the right thing for something else.
Camera companies seem to be on this eternal quest for cleanliness. And I don't know who directed that, who was the kind of higher up god of digital cameras that said, we need to make the cleanest image possible. We need to, like, I don't know who did that. I think it's a mistake. And I'm not saying that we should throw caution to the wind, but I think we're compromising emotion and feel for digital cleanliness. And I think if you look at it in the graph, I think we've gone over the cliff. I think we're on the downhill right now. And yeah, I think we peaked kind of in the late 70s when it come to the quality of the film stock, the quality of the lenses, the quality of the filmmaking. I think that was the kind of the pinnacle. Everything from that point became too colorful, too clean, too sharp.
Yeah, including film stocks, right? I mean, this started before digital. Like, film stocks in the 2000s were getting really clean and really sharp and contrasty and colorful, and lenses were getting really sharp. And yeah, you've seen, I think once digital came out, maybe people had this realization, like, oh, now we need to degrade the image. We need to use filtration. We need to use vintage lenses, all these kind of trends that we're seeing over the last few years. But there's a reason for it. It's because I think, people just like evoking that feeling of the films that we remember growing up, or the films that inspired us, and all of them have texture and grain and slight degradation, and that's, I think, what we were always looking for. And it's in the lens. That Koa lens that Gareth used on the Scout remained throughout the whole shoot. We ended up shooting the film.
Was that the hero lens?
Yeah.
And how did you land on 276? Was it just because when you put that lens on the FX3 sensor, it became 276 and you're like, that sounds good? Or was it based on Lawrence of Arabia? Or were you like, talk to me about basically going, let's crop the side to a normal aspect ratio?
Well, you can correct me. my maths might be wrong, but when you basically put 2 times lens on a 16:9 sensor, you get 2 9s, which is 3.5.
3.5 to 1. Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted to go 3.5 to 1, right? And so you're going, let's just release the movie in 3.5 to 1. Come on, everyone, let's go. Like, you're there against the Boulder again. And I sort of knew, like, this, they're not going to do it, but maybe we'll get lucky and they'll do it. But what they would use as a reason not to do it is no one's ever done that. And so then you take that argument and you go, okay, what has anyone ever done? And because of things like Hateful Eight and, Lawrence of Arabia and whatever else in the Ultra Panavision, you're allowed 276. Like, that's the widest it's ever been.
Right, because somebody else broke that.
Somebody did it. Yeah, exactly.
Ago. That's right.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, I don't know if you have, but I've noticed 0.5 to 1 on some commercials and things.
Of course. Well, because that's where it's like, well, it's, whatever, let's just do it. But it's interesting because that like path of least resistance thing, I mean, I ran into it on making Joker when I went, well, we're shooting on the Alexa 65. I want to release the movie 2.2. And they're like, can you just pick a aspect ratio that's normal, like 239 or 185 or Academy? Like, don't make it. What? Come on. And I'm like, wait, but
They're making it hard for us. We've already printed it. We've already printed it. Just choose something that we printed.
And now I'm in the weeds. This is another conversation, but just about now I'm obsessed with the packaging of a movie, which is like what it's packaged in for the DCP. Like, are you packaging it in a 185 package or a 239 anamorphic package, and how it's presented, and like all these other things, which is why they like the path of least resistance, right? But you're right. You don't change anything until you sort of push through that barrier.
Can I just talk a little bit just to round out that conversation about the 2DPs thing from my perspective anyway?
Oh, but, yes.
What was really important, again, getting to the Oren point, there was a couple of ways we could have skinned the cat of me going to do another film. I was originally going to come to Thailand for half the project or a quarter, but then COVID struck and there was quarantine issues, and anyway, it's boring conversation, but the reality was that I couldn't actually get there. And I had to do my part of the role remotely at that point. And, that analogy that Gareth's talking about that boulder is critically important, because if you have people on the wrong side of the boulder pushing against that, then it's going to make it harder for him to hold it up. So for me, I needed to make sure that the people that I hired to grip, to gaff, to focus pull, to dit, to all those other things were going to be able to roll with those punches. And that role of another DOP or a DOP in that case was critical, because if I'd hired somebody that was, it's not going to be ageist, I'm not talking about age or experience, because I don't think that's fair and I don't think it's right. Because I've met older DPs who shoot like it's their first day, in attitude-wise, in a good way, and I've met younger DPs who shoot like they've been doing it for 40 years from an attitude perspective, not from a skill perspective. So what it came down to was finding somebody that was gullible enough to go along for the ride, and I'll be frank about that, because it was a ride that was kind of at times thankless, because you were literally solving problems that Gareth was presenting by shooting in a direction that you've not prepared for, or there were times where it was a thankless task. But there are other times that the rewards were overwhelming, because suddenly you've created an environment for our director, that is visually fantastic, that looks like nothing else we've ever seen, that doesn't feel like a Hollywood blockbuster, doesn't feel like you've shot on stage. So the rewards were outstanding, but also at times it was a tricky job. And so the person that I needed to get was somebody that didn't have an ego, that wouldn't mind if at the end of the day they walked home, shook everyone's hand, and said, "You know what? That shot wasn't quite right, and that shot wasn't quite right." Because this is what I do. Like I drove home, and I'm like, "That shot was shit." And this, I wanted to drive off the bridge, because it's of all the shots that I couldn't quite nail, and so I needed somebody that was solid from a personality standpoint. It's somebody that was also incredibly skilled, and not so skilled that they knew how to do everything. Because if they knew how to do everything that Gareth wanted in a better way, then that wasn't the right spirit. So when I spoke to Oren about it, I was kind of quite frank with him and said exactly what I just said to you. Like, there are going to be times where you're going to want to wonder why you're there, and then there are going to be days like, I know why I'm here. So, I think that it swings and roundabouts in that role. So very tricky role, and incredibly, but as you've seen from the images and the lighting, great combination of great operating from Monsieur right here, and fantastic lighting from Oren and his team.
Yeah, well, I saw it in IMAX, and I was, like I said, I also agree that what you make it on, how you make it, it means nothing except as an interesting conversation when the movie works. And that's why I think it's an interesting conversation now. When I saw it in the theater, I was incredibly impressed regardless of whether you shot it on 15 perf IMAX cameras, like meaning it had nothing to do with that. It was literally like the color, the lighting, the overall look and feel of the movie. I loved. Anyway, let's get into some shots because we can also talk about like that Kawa and talk about some of the other things. This shot here, I'm just going to start here only because it was in all three. This scene was in all three of your decks that I asked you guys to pick some shots you want to talk about. Oren, start here. Why'd you pick it and the history of the shot?
It's probably in my picks for the same reason it is for the other two guys. This to me was just one of the great examples of like the whole ethos of the film, because I mean, I'd be curious, Larry, like at first glance, how you think we shot
I thought it was shot on an LED volume as part of driving work.
Right. So in Thailand, they didn't have an LED volume. That was discussed, that was brought up, but not an option. And also, if they did, it would have been extremely expensive. And this is like, it's like a 30-second scene, so it doesn't make sense. It goes back to that conversation.
The reason I thought maybe you bundled together a bunch of driving work. That's, I guess, why I thought. I didn't think it was a standalone like shot on its own.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the logical, way to do it is like, oh, you bundle all together, all the driving shots, you get an LED volume. But there's no need, because Gareth's idea for this was, well, why don't we just do this, in the more old school way? Like, you don't need LED volume, you don't need 3D tracking, you don't need depth, you don't need all that stuff for driving plates. You just need a 2D kind of flat thing. So why don't we do it the way that they used to with projection? And I think Greig and I both offline were sort of like, I don't know about that. It's tricky because you're committing to put something in camera and you're burning that shit, right? Like you're saying, well, we're going to need to find a driving clip and we're going to project it. And it's going to be, it is what it is. We're going to have to get the levels right. We're going to have to match the foreground background.
And you're in a warehouse, like a non-blacked out warehouse as well. Like there's a whole other backstory about where it was shooting.
Yeah. It was on location. Yeah. This was on location. And we paired this with another whole shoot day that was taking place in this big warehouse space, which is where the AI lab raid happens, where they're going into the lab. So it's this big warehouse factory area.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, so this was like set up in a little side building, and we rented a big projector screen. It was like 16 feet wide. And Gareth had bought a couple of projectors. Like that was part of the kit that came with us to Thailand. And I think he could talk about this more if there was some specific testing that he had done beforehand, but there was ideas that like, oh, we could use this tool, this projector, for so many things. We could use it for projecting plates. We could use it to project in-camera visual effects that were happening on screen, which we did. There's one shot where John David's character is scanning like a body. He has this kind of scanny device. That's the projector built into like an art department case that's playing a video file of this kind of scanning effect. So that shot is in camera with the actual projector, and there's a cable sticking out the back that's plugged into a laptop somewhere. And so I think it's such a great exemplar of the whole approach to the film. And the reason it's raining is because the driving plate, which we bought online, it's like a generic plate. We didn't shoot it. It wasn't the best plate, and we wanted to kind of, I don't know, cover up the seams a little bit. So we were like, oh, just to sell the illusion even more, we'll make it raining. Because it'll muddy up the plate a little bit, and it won't make it obvious that it's just a piece of video that's projecting onto a projector. There's atmosphere as well. There's some atmos.
Yeah, but it's also an excellent thing if you are like, go just fuck the windows up a little. At least you're like not gonna reveal some of the weaknesses of a technique if it's there, right?
Exactly. But we tested it in prep. Like we had the idea, and I think all three of us had talked about, well, maybe we could do it with green screen. It'll give them flexibility later. And then it goes back to that mentality of like, let's commit to these decisions, like let's commit, because the end result could be even better. And so we tested it and it worked. And then we ended up doing it on the film.
I think this is an incredibly good example of exactly what we were talking about before, about the fact that there's a standard way of doing things. There is a standard way. And, the standard way of doing this would be obviously to put it on a practical low loader and to take it through a location and blah, 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 which we did impossible. The second type of thing might be green screen. The third type of thing is, an LED volume of sorts. And this was a really good example of how all of us at times we had our own boulders, but obviously Gareth had his own, and this is how he dealt with it. So Oren and I were a little bit like, ooh, really? It could be a bit really like we were privately kind of going, how do we solve this? Like, do we do that? Do we do this? We came up with reference and tried to figure it out. And I remember we had a Zoom meeting with all three of us. And I remember saying to Gareth, like, my fear with this is it's going to look really bad because you don't have any atmosphere from above. You can't rig lights from above. You've just got a screen. Like, if you're doing a dust shot, you really need atmosphere. I said, you could probably get away with a little light of it, but I said, this is I was a bit negative about the whole idea. Not to be negative Nelly, but just to kind of put the reality,
You were like the realist. You were
I was being the realist.
The counterpoint. Yeah. The counterpoint.
Exactly. I was kind of going, and this is how bad it could look if we're not careful. I remember Gareth sitting there kind of going, mm-hmm.
Whenever Greig tells you though, whenever you get Greig to the edge of the cliff, he's like, I think we're on the edge of the cliff now. You're like, oh, we've got to go down the edge now. You've said that.
And that's what was so funny, because the whole time I was talking, Gareth was sitting there going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm like, I know that look. That's the look that he gives other people when he just wants to tell them to go F themselves and do it in his own way. Like, he'll never tell them that because you're too polite, Gareth. But you're always thinking, no, I'm gonna prove you wrong.
But Gareth, had you tested it already? Had you sort of known? Yeah.
No, to give credit where it's due, there was a short I saw a long time ago called Similo that was shot by a DP called McGregor, and it was a very lo-fi, really good little sci-fi short that was very inspiring. And they had a similar moment in Iceland. And I remember, I've watched some behind the scenes, or found a clip somewhere, and they basically done a projector in their garage or something. And this is early 2000s, and it looked great. And I always just stored that as like, see, that can work. Mm-hmm. And then so when it came to this, it was like, it felt like, okay, we can do a projector. But I've got a question for you, Larry, because you sort of semi-passed this one by knowing it was like not green screen or a real car. The previous shot, the one that establishes the truck, how do we do that?
Yeah, there's a great story on that one too.
I just thought it was 100% CGI car.
Okay. So when we were shooting another scene, we were walking back from having scouted, a bit further down this river, and we were walking back to this location, and there was all these rocks, and I was like, God, this looks like it could be a model of a massive canyon. And I just said to Oren, when you're shooting that other stuff on the way back, can you just set up like a slider and do like a pretend miniature helicopter shot? So basically, if that truck was real, it's the size of a matchbox.
Oh, that's hilarious. I didn't know that.
And so it's just like, if you could stand on that truck and crush it with your foot. But scale, there's nothing in there that's saying the scale. And so we kind of got away with it. It was just like an opportunistic thing that we just grabbed.
Yeah, I stopped down to as low as the lens would go. I think it's like a 16 to get everything sharp. Because otherwise, if you were wide open, these rocks in the foreground would be completely blurry. Like, the scale of this is like 3 feet across what you're looking at right now. And then we just did this really slow slider move across, and that was it. And that was the shot. I loved stuff like that, and I love the projector and all of these things, because to me it feels like that's like your childhood imagination at play. That's looking at some rocky landscape on the ground and at your feet, and then imagining like, oh, well, what if this was actually this realm, and I'm a giant, trudging through it, and like the scale. It's just using that brain, and I think that applying that mentality and maintaining that sense of sort of discovery and wonder and scrappiness and inventiveness was so instrumental to the whole film that that's why I selected that shot, and that previous one was in there as well for those reasons, because I think it just speaks to the mentality of the whole thing,
100%. So two technical questions. The plates that you actually projected, first, what'd you project onto? Was it front projection onto like a gray screen?
Yeah, it's front projection onto, we rented like a conference size 16-foot projector screen for lectures.
Yeah.
And it perfectly fills the frame. If you pan left or right, you're looking off the projector. And I again, credit where it's due. I think ILM maybe helped fill some of the gaps a little bit on the edges. And then, yeah, what's the second question?
The plates were did you end up shooting those yourselves somewhere in the process of making the film, or?
No, those are from drivingplates.com.
There you go. Good.
ILM helped a little bit. We had to stitch them together to create a bit of a longer run, and we added some depth of field because the plates are fully sharp. And so obviously this projector screen is maybe 5 feet from the car, so the depth wouldn't look right. So we had them blur the background a little bit, and then we added ambient light as much as we could to create the effect that Greig was talking about, because you want to feel a little bit of that dusky ambience coming in from the back and from the front. And then we put the little dashboard light, which I think was probably a Aperture MC or a DMG Dash. I don't remember which one we used, but we had both little battery powered LEDs and gave him that kind of warm glow for the color contrast. And yeah, that was it.
And are you living in a scene like this in that 10,000 ASA, or no, you back down to sort of living there for most of the film?
Yes, no, but that's an important thing, because honestly, at any lower ISO, the projector wouldn't be bright enough. So that's what unlocked that for us as a tool.
Amazing what 12,800 ASA, how it changes a lot of things. We all want to shoot at 1600, or, I remember when the Alexa first came out, I tested it for 0 dark 30, and Catherine was like, "Oh my God, we can shoot in the dark. No need for lights." That was, 1600 ASA or something. But this is ridiculous. This is kind of beyond that realm. And, I think that a lot of this film would be very different if we had to shoot at 800 ASA. It would be technically, and the backstory and the crew, and it would be very different.
This also shot here was in 2 of your decks. All right, Gareth, why'd you pick this shot? Because again, I was like, I want to know the story behind it, because it was like, okay, of all the shots you could pick to talk about, tell me why this one.
So, the goal was originally to go to 7 different countries and just basically go to everywhere, like everywhere in the script. For every single scene, there was like an amazing location in the world that would work great. And if we got our crew small enough, it would be cheaper to fly to anywhere in the world than it is to build a set in a massive studio. And so it was like, we're going to just go everywhere and do this for real, right? And so we had all this Nepal stuff, we had, Tokyo and everything. And then COVID happened. And at some point, I got sat down, or over Zoom, basically told in a very depressing way, you cannot go to all these countries. You have to just go to one, because no actor will ever agree to do 2 weeks quarantine as you move around everywhere. And it was true, and so we said, and I never let go. I said, okay, I'll agree to do it all in one country, but you got to give me this chance at the end to go off and shoot all this other stuff if we get the movie in this one country, i.e. Thailand. And so they thought, oh yeah, whatever, we can say yes now and change it later. And then, so we shot the whole movie in Thailand. And then as we wrapped at the very end, and we'd shot all the scripted scenes pretty much, there was like maybe 1 or 2 that we didn't quite, do for some reason. And you could feel, okay, here comes the next meeting where I'm going to get brought into a room or a trailer, and they're going to go, yeah, we said that you should go to these other countries. And I just, not that you ever do this, and I never needed to do this, but I just said, look, I'll pay myself, right? Like, it's going to cost fuck all money. We got this camera I can hold. I'll just pay myself, just minimal. And basically we had a minimal crew. We didn't have a sound recordist. We didn't have virtually anyone. There's about 6 people from the main crew, and it, like, even Oren and everybody couldn't go. But I got a DOP, I guess, but I was using him more as an operator, Andrew Michael Ellis, who had worked with Malik on a few things, and I'd seen some shorts he had done that I thought looked beautiful. And so I was like, to get the maximum out of this, if Andrew goes off and does this, and I'll go off and do this. So every time we came to a location like the Himalayas here, there'd be this list of stuff, and I'd say, you go off and try and shoot this, I'll go off and try and shoot that, and we'll meet in the middle here, And then sometimes we would help each other, then we'd go off again. And we were just trying to suck it all up in a straw because it was like the greatest visuals in the world. And Andrew actually got the grain woman, like some lady must have been just sifting through grain, like these farmers, you know, in these villages. And he got this shot. And every time I see a shot like this that feels very Terrence Malick to me, I would get super excited about the idea of that being a robot, you know, like the idea that you take a shot, like if you would never, the amount of money it costs to do that shot and design it and create it. If we tried to say to a studio on a normal movie, oh yeah, and then we're going to have this sort of robot lady and she's going to be playing with grain. Who's this lady? Oh, it doesn't matter. You never see her anywhere else. And she's playing with grain and it's just one of these textural moments that happens in like a normal film. And yeah, but so hang on. So what does the hand look like? Oh, we'll design, you know, it would just become like $100,000 shot for this non-moment, just textural nothingness and like poetry, whatever you want to call it. And the fact we get these moments in the film because we went about it the opposite way, which is let's just shoot it documentary style. Let's grab all these, like we had so much material. Like I probably had like 15 farmer little moments that could have become robots and had to get it down to my favorite one, you know? And so there was all this material. And once you pick the one, we're using the same hand that's been used throughout the whole movie. Every robot in the film has that hand. And so it's just the same hand. And I just love it I feel like this is the sort of shot when you say, what are you doing differently in this movie? What are you doing that no film's ever done before? I mean, mostly you always end up going, well, probably nothing because no one's that original. but I do feel like that kind of shot, I go, I can't tell you a film that has had that like artistic organicness, but it's robots.
Right.
And the shot that precedes it with the kid being offered the chocolate and you know, I mean, District 9, I guess, but I would say that this is more poetry, you know?
Yeah, because District 9 was going for a documentary look, right? Which this was not. This was, yeah, it was cinematic, but it was naturalistic.
It's funny, and this is not a takeaway at all. It's more of like, oh, it gave me the same feel, and it's a wonderful part of a movie that I actually quite love, which is Benjamin Button. Do you remember there's a little montage in Tibet, and I think it was shot maybe by Rodrigo. Like it wasn't shot by Claudio. It was like, oh, just go shoot some shit with Brad Pitt in worlds that you couldn't take a whole crew to all these places, and it has a vibe that I remember thinking, oh yeah, this is that thing that unless you strip it all back, you'll never get it. You'll never. It's also one of the things about when you like you talked about when you design a shot, so many conversations happen where they're like, well, that's too expensive. And I'm like, well, it's not expensive until it's actually a VFX shot that's in the cut. You know, I know you've had to deal with this before as well, Gareth, where they're like, make you count up every VFX shot so you can hit a number. And you're like, but it's not a shot until we pay for it. It's not a shot until it's even in the edit. Like, I know you're like trying to figure it out, but like
Yeah, we had a really good deal with ILM where, and they were very understanding of the process in that what can happen on a set is, you know, you start doing what might feel like a visual effects shot, then suddenly the on-set visual effects supervisor is going, whoa, what's going on? What's this? And you're like, oh, maybe it's this, maybe I'm going to do this. And they go, hang on. We need to put dots on faces, we need to put tracking markers, we need to, and suddenly this like little opportunistic moment is getting destroyed, you know, because it's becoming very controlled and you've lost the moment. And so we had this deal, which is, we have a sandbox of shots we're going to do, you know, in the movie, but we're not going to say what they are when we shoot it. We'll say what they are when we get to the edit. So like, we're going to shoot all kinds of random shit and it's going to scare you and you're going to go, what's this? And I'm going to go, I don't know. And so there would be all this stuff. And God bless Andrew, who was our on-set VFX supervisor. The deal was also, Andrew, we're not going to stop for you. We're not going to we're going to really annoy you. We're not going to put tracking markers on things. We're just going to shoot it. And then as we walk away, feel free to come in and do whatever you need to do. Take a million photos, measure things, whatever it is, as we go somewhere else. And they did it. You know, they grabbed all this stuff and complained and made it work.
I mean, what's amazing to me is that shot you didn't have Andrew on in Nepal.
Right.
So that hand and the lighting that they replicated there I guess by eye. Like, I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but it looks amazing.
That really talks to the personality choices too, Larry. You know, like we were saying before about choosing Oren, like it really, the personality choices are critical. If you get one, I won't say bad apple, but I just have. If you get one person in a group of people that is drumming a different beat, it could be a nightmare. And like Gareth just said, if you have a VFX supervisor at that point who's new because maybe they don't know the deal, the whole shoot becomes a different shoot. So it's like that everyone on the same rhythm was critical, including ILM. I mean, the work ILM did on
is amazing. I mean, it's insanely good. It's insanely good. And I watched the movie in IMAX, and it's like, it's immaculate. And the way that it integrates into the photography, which is, that's what I was saying about the world building. The world building is incredible.
Oh, and Larry, just to add to that shot, because I had the shot of the kid with the candy bar as well. And the reason I put that in there, I think for the same reason Gareth did, was like, what I like about it is there's this cycle of the film that started from this test film where Gareth went out basically by himself with the little gimbal, shooting an entirely natural light, and being fully opportunistic without a crew, and finding all these moments of beauty. And then at the end of the shoot, we kind of looped back to a similar thing, and Gareth was able to go out again with a slightly bigger crew and with the actor and everything, but it was the same approach, the same ethos. And I love the lighting in this shot, and it's just completely naturalistic. It's just fully just available light in this location. And when Greig and I were talking about lighting for the film, because the actual film is filled with a huge mix. There's completely natural light, and then there's augmented natural light that we shaped and curated, and then there's stuff that's a hybrid. It's on location, but we're adding lights through windows or whatever. And then there's stuff in the film that's fully a built set. And across all of those different things, we needed the lighting and the whole mood and feel of the movie to feel consistent. And we looked at a ton of reference images. Gareth is the most well-researched director I've encountered. And when I came aboard the project, there was folders of thousands of reference images that he had collected for each scene. I mean, it was really incredible, such a great resource. And we, the three of us, would talk and look through those images and to dissect the lighting and all sorts of things. But one thing that Greig and I would go back to, at some point we were like, we need to go look at the test film again, like the proof of concept film, because there's some really amazing lighting in it. Actually, that's another shot from the proof of concept, I think, the praying robot monk that's just by the fire. Because I think that's also from Nepal.
Wow.
And there's so much just like beautiful, raw, real, natural lighting that was in that footage that Gareth went out and got. And Greig and I would talk about, we were like, how do we replicate that? You know, how do we strive towards that when we're doing artificial lighting? Like, we want it to feel unlit. We want it to feel like we just got lucky, the way that Gareth did when, you know, stumbled upon that hut with that light coming in, that top light, or that moment with the people praying by the fire. Like, it has to feel lucky, you know, like we just stumbled upon this beautiful frame with this perfect color contrast. And I think that really drove so much of the lighting approach and the ethos in general, was like, how do we make sure it feels the way that shot feels that has no lighting in it at all?
But you guys did it in spades. I want to get to a shot of that Greig picked, but shout out to you, Gareth, because when we did those pickups on Godzilla 2014, ShotDeck was already something I had been thinking about for 5 or 6 years, because I was like, I want these reference materials because it's a great way to communicate. You delivered to me, for our handful of scenes that we did, just folders of reference images. And I thought, well, wait a second, if I'm doing it and this incredible director is using this as references, I got to build this thing. And it was right after we did those reshoots that I actually found Alon and Bodhi and my co-founders, and we were like, let's build this thing for real, because I'm like, if I don't build it now, I'm never going to build it. So I guess in large part, you're like the impetus for why ShotDeck came to be, because you were an affirmation that this is a communication device for all filmmakers, you know. And so thank you for that, if nothing else.
Thank you for making ShotDeck. It's an amazing resource. Like,
yeah, it's a very, very good resource, man.
So in your shots, Greig, talk to me about this shot and why'd you sort of pick it to talk about, and tell me some of the complexities of this shot.
I mean, there were thousands of shots that I could have chosen. There's a couple of sequences that I've chosen here. Well, this is some stuff on the volume, as well as some other sequences that Gareth and Oren have picked. So there's been good to talk about the volume work, because the volume itself, having shot a number of times in the volume, it's really tricky to integrate into the real world. You know, like the light from LED volumes are different. The process of shooting is different. To try and shoot on a volume is quite different to the way we were shooting this movie. If you're doing a big film and you're using LED screens for trains or for reflections, well, it kind of works. For this film, it was hard for hundreds of reasons, namely that the FX3 doesn't sync up to the screens, that we have to use another camera, therefore there's a whole lot of process involved. But it was also because it was such a different place. We were off the earth. You know, we were in a place that was kind of earthly in the sense that there's biology, there's trees, there's direct sun. Like there are a lot of things going against the volume to shoot the same way that we would have shot the rest of the movie. So just trying to integrate that volume work into this film was quite a challenge.
And like obviously that was the best solution for that section of the film. But talk to me about how you got there. Yeah, and what other things are sort of also volume, and how did you collect those? Were they all sort of combined to do in London after like the core photography, or no?
So again, that was another part of the way that we co-DP, which was really quite fun, because you know, setting up the loads for these things requires a fair bit of finesse. You know, you don't just turn up to set one day and have, you know, the LED volume built, because generally it's been built by people that don't have to shoot in it, because they have a 3D background, and so they deal with 3D. They've never stood on a set with a camera and an actor and a director wondering why we can't look over there or why we can't do this. Like there was very much a building process of working with ILM to build out these loads whilst the team was shooting in Thailand. So, you know, I was on the same time zone as ILM, they weren't. So there was a bit of a kind of a duopoly where I was setting that up, and also at the same time planning the studio shoot at Pinewood. Because, you know, the end of the shoot itself, there was, I think, a week of shooting at Pinewood, which required sort of a fair big lighting. Like it changed, the rules changed at that point. You know what I mean? Like we might have had only, you know, 15 battery powered lights on the entire shoot, but in the studio, suddenly we had hundreds. You know, it was a proper shoot with green screen, with proper crew. Everyone was like, you know, proper. So it was kind of
Wait, when you hear that, Gareth, were you like, or was it like, I could live with this for a week, or like did it suddenly like break? Yeah,
I was super curious about stagecraft. You know what I mean? We'd used LEDs on Rogue One for some of the spaceship stuff, and had success with it in that sense. And so and stagecraft had come along and with Greig, and totally looked like this might be the future in some way of filming. And it was like, so I wanted to have that experience. And in a weird way, when we were pitching the movie, it was so ambitious in a very strange way, and it only makes sense in filmmaking. Everyone gets nervous, and then when you say, don't worry, we're gonna do this incredibly expensive, crazy, outrageous way of shooting some scenes at the end, that reassures everyone, and they're like, oh great, it'll be like a big proper movie. Like
everyone gets their own chairs,
and they're like, at least that stuff will work. They're like, at least a week of photography will be all right.
We know that's going to look epic and amazing because it's industrial light and magic and Mandalorian technology and whatever. And so everyone goes like, we can relax, they're going to pull it off, you know. But what's interesting about this shot, and I'll show you one that I selected as well to prove the point, is that, so this is stagecraft, right? So essentially what is behind John David is an LED screen, right? So basically that's a photograph from a location in Thailand, a train station. And the divide actually isn't where you think it is. It's not the door. The divide is that little dark rim on the white, in between the white. So the white on the other side of that is CG, and the white on this side is a real set. So that the divide's not where you expect it to be, and that kind of helps the brain.
Yeah, that seems almost harder to imagine how that's the divide there versus this. This seems natural.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was funny about what happened here was, right, Greig and ILM and everybody had worked a lot, and Gareth obviously on the big room, the big round room, but then there were a few shots facing back where we were like, oh, there needs to be something behind JD's head, like outside of this, and we weren't really sure where we were going to shoot the location stuff that led to that scene yet, because things were kind of shifting around. And then we ended up in this train station. Yeah.
Yeah. If stagecraft didn't exist, let's imagine it's a technology that doesn't exist, then we would have done the whole film this way, which is, where's the closest place to this location? So we had this space station at the end of the film. And so we were looking around Thailand and Bangkok for like anything that looked slightly sci-fi in any way, shape, or form. And this was like this weird, not airport, not train station kind of place that had been built to, it's a long story, but anyway, it wasn't much used. And it was kind of, we could take it over for the night. And so this is like a real location, you know, with just the kids running down a giant hallway, and then ILM are augmenting that shot. Like, it's got that amount of depth to it for real in the original play, but they're making more sci-fi shapes, and like, so we didn't build anything for that. That's like a train station that's been augmented. And we did the same sort of thing through this sequence, everything on Nomad, convention centers, and, you know, anything slightly sci-fi. There's only 2 locations in Nomad where we use stagecraft, and that was the escape pod bay and the biosphere with the grass. And all the other running around or anything else in there is usually a real like convention center or somewhere like that.
This shot?
No, so that the exteriors are different. So that is actually green screen.
Yeah, that was at our Pinewood sort of big traditional shoot, like what Greig was alluding to. Was we shot a lot of the space station exteriors. John David climbing on all this superstructure. Actually, we used the projector again for this shot.
Did all that.
Yeah, the light flickering on him as he's kind of moving through this space was projected. Andrew, our on-set ILM VFX, created basically like an animation in After Effects that was just some shadowy shapes that animated and sort of moved past the screen. And then we projected it onto this structure. It created the effect of movement. Obviously, the structure is just sitting there on the stage, and again, the 12,800 is the reason we could do it, because it made the projector wouldn't have been bright enough, but at the higher ISO, it looks like really bright, punchy sunlight. So yeah, that's how we did that.
If I recall correctly, too, I think we actually had put up grey screen, hadn't we? And we lit it with LEDs green.
Yes.
So we deliberately went grey because of, you know, I personally have a hatred. I'm sure I'm the only DP in the world that hates green screen or blue screen. So I'll just come clean. So at least with grey screen, we can all think properly. And all we have to do is light the right green.
And I feel like we're there now with Roto and other things where I feel like we could all start making that happen, because I agree, whether it's white screen or gray screen or some of these other things. So like, to keep some of that, the benefits of LEDs, like that the interactive light is filling in all this sort of blackness of a stage and all that. It's the same thing of if you could do a white screen, it has a similar effect, or a gray screen.
I think as DPs, we should put in our contract that we don't shoot with green or blue. I think we're almost at that point where we can, the union can do something, or because, I don't know.
I don't know, but I remember hearing this, but maybe you can speak to this. It was from somebody who said in some countries, the VFX department's in charge of green screens, putting them up. They have their own grip teams. They have their own people to put up green screens, as opposed to the grip department in our world. And when they are in charge of putting up green screens, they're like, we'll roto it, we'll roto it, we'll roto it. Like they're always like, we'll roto it, because they know what a pain in the ass it is to put up 300 feet of green screen, you know?
It's a great idea. Take it out of their budget as well. Take the greens out of their budget.
Wait, I want to just go to one of my shots, because I mean, Jesus, we can never. I mean, we could do this for 20 hours, because I could talk about all these things. There's a shot I picked late that I quite liked. I just loved the lighting in this, and I was curious. All is this is done in your sort of Thailand world, but this little bit of like moving lights, the movers that come in. Talk to me a little bit about this, Oren.
Yeah, yeah. This is one of my favorite lighting setups, and the scene mostly got cut from the film, but enough pieces of it made it in that at least we can still kind of point to it. But yeah, this one was fun. This was shot in a real nightclub in Phuket, Thailand, and the lighting in there was horrible. I mean, it was just horrendous. So this is the perfect example of when, you know, we would approach every location asking ourselves first and foremost, like, does this location give us what we need? Can we use the available light? And oftentimes the answer was yes, and in this case the answer was no. Like, the lighting was just tacky, colorful, it didn't have that kind of curated look that we were after. So Pitai, our gaffer, and I, you know, we were sort of chatting and realized, like, we have to build the lighting here from scratch. So we brought down a lighting designer from Bangkok, basically, to kind of come in and set this up. And it was essentially using the lights that they had there. It was still leaning into the ethos of what was available to us. So we used their existing lighting, which was basically, they had all these movers, these tiny little movers around the center stage. And we had a lighting programmer come in and kind of just turn them all white. So they weren't all 3 RGB garish colors, and then design some sort of moving pattern that would just create this busyness. So that's what that is. And there's a laser as well, which I think was also a Gareth thing that showed up early. There was this laser projector. Do you remember this thing, Gareth? This box, the laser box? It came with the projector, and we tested it a little bit, and we were like, oh, this thing can do interesting stuff, but we don't know how to use it. So we gave it to the lighting designer. And so that's the red patterns of the laser.
Yeah, right.
And then there's practicals around the back, and some of those were existing and some of them we added. So it was kind of a mix. And yeah, that's basically how we built it out. And the whole thing is lit 360. I mean, this was really the approach for the whole thing, is anytime we were lighting something, the idea was to treat it like it was a found location. It was sort of what I was saying before, like as if we just walked in here and just got really lucky. And then Gareth can still come in and, with the handheld camera, the gimbal and everything, shoot in any direction, set up a scene in any little place, and it's lit. It looks good in this direction, it looks good in this direction. Maybe we just need to curate or shape some things like on the fly, which we did quite a bit as we were moving around, but the 95% of it, like the big pieces, were all in place. So that was a pre-light. That was they had a day to kind of set that up, and then we shot in there the next day. One of the rare pre-lights that we had.
Yeah, I think that approach though is kind of where the film gets its look. Because
yes,
every frame, like, there is definitely lack of perfection in almost every shot. I'm talking technical perfection.
Yeah,
like there are things in that shot that absolutely, if you were lighting specifically for that moment, you would refine and you'd net and you do this and do that. There are some mistakes that are left in that kind of add to that, and also the grading process too. We did lean heavily into the grading process, not necessarily for that shot, but there were times, again, you know, thinking about the process, that Gareth goes into a room with his actors and the sound recordist and closes the door, and you know, and they get what they get. And meanwhile, outside, everyone's busily changing the lights, and there are times you want to make a change, but you're not going to go in there. But we know that in the grade, again, we can refine things. Like if we've got to take his head down a little bit, if it's too bright, or like there's opportunities there to refine later. And it's better to spend that time later when you know it's in the edit. The Gareth's point about the VFX, like, get it all in the can and then figure out how to make it look the best.
Yeah. It was Dave Cole and at FOTOKEM, and Claire and the whole team there. I think, yeah, they really went above and beyond. There's a lot of shaping and a lot of curating and painting and just sanding the edges a little bit, just to elevate the curation a little when you're in a kind of chaotic lighting scenario like that.
And I remember, like, on day one of the grade, we sat down and just started, start chipping away through the movie, and it was really clear like, hang on, the LUT, you know, the basic look of the shots wasn't good. and so we stopped everything. It was potentially like a scary thing to do because we only have so much time in the grade, and we spent a week or two just on the LUT. And then it was a kind of real gamble because if we wasted those 2 weeks, we're not going to get them back. And so, but then suddenly we thank God to FOTOKEM. I think their color scientist is called Joseph.
Yeah.
And they won't like this joke, but they got it. Was that I used to joke it was Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamlet, and because we're basically trying to get this like the perfect LUT, like of a 1970s film, and really really dug in deep to that. And then once that was right, and they got it really good, then when they can, obviously file, replace, drag and drop it over to everything, and then suddenly the grade, like every shot that landed was like, great, oh, that's great. It was all starting from a really good place, but it's at the very beginning, it was frightening because at the LUT, I had bought this, what they called the $5 LUT. So during COVID, I got, everyone's had too much time on their hands, right? And so one of the things I did, like an idiot, because LUTs are so cheap, I bought every single LUT off the entire internet. I spent a few $1,000s. I got every single one. And then I went and shot. I got a load of crayons, like one of those 20, when you get, 200 packs of crayons.
Yeah.
Spread them all out. So it looked like a absolute like rainbow mess. Got my girlfriend in the shot and just filmed something. And then basically drag and dropped every single LUT that existed on it and did like a Pepsi challenge. And like, if you can make that shot look good, then that's a great LUT. And I found this one where I was like, that's the one. And I gave it to Greig and Oren. I was like, we're going to use this LUT. This is my favorite LUT. And you could see they were fucking hated it. and
We
like
love the way it
trying
looked. We love the way it looked, but it was definitely a $5 LUT.
Yeah. And so that
in the way that it was like destructive, like was it just something where you're like, this is like not
No,
good?
it would rip the image apart. And the thing is some shots looked amazing with it because basically what it did is it took every color in a frame, and then it had two buckets. It was either blue or orange, and everything that was slightly warm would go into this bucket, and everything that was slightly cool would go into this bucket. And some frames looked amazing, like especially ones that already had that kind of color contrast, looked great. And then other frames, it would just tear the image apart. And so it was it was an aesthetic win, and it was a technical fail. Like it was the LUT. I mean, obviously, who knows who makes these? Somebody probably makes them in 5 minutes in Resolve and exports them for, I don't know. But it was not a very technically sound LUT. But FOTOKEM went in and recreated it, basically. That was our show LUT.
Oh, they did for when you were shooting? Like, did you
for
have
when we were
LUT?
shooting?
Yeah, because you needed a LUT to sort of at least light to.
Yeah. So they went in and basically were like, let's take the idea of this LUT and what it does, and we would call it the oval because it's basically just squishing all of the color palette into like a more limited palette that falls along that kind of warm cool line. But what they did was they recreated, I don't know the color science because I don't understand this stuff. That's what Joseph's for. But they created a version of it that wasn't completely ripping the image apart, but that was doing the same thing. But then even in the final grade, we found that LUT was also still too destructive, and then we had to kind of rebuild it from scratch again. And then we had the breakthrough in the grade of finding the LUT that we ended up going with. That
it was kind of a bit of a miracle work that they've done as well. I mean, you think about like renegade filmmakers choosing, these kind of prosumery kind of ways of doing things. But the reality is the rubber hits the road at the point where you then have to grade the film for final theatrical release. Like no one's watching it on small 5-inch monitors. They're watching it in IMAX. And so FOTOKEM had that sort of dubious task of making it look how those images felt, even though those images kind of on a 5-inch monitor felt good, they just didn't translate. And so I give them full credit for that because they went in there without any hesitation and and just fixed it and solved it. It was quite an effort though. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, no, it was, but it's really incredible. I mean, I think in the end, I mean, it's interesting. The proof is in the pudding, right? That these colors are in the camera. The camera is capable. The FX3, that little under $4,000 camera, is capable of capturing these images, and it's capable of rendering this color. And I think it's worth pointing out that we shot ProRes RAW to an Atomos Ninja recorder. So the camera, the internal recording is a little limited in its color depth and bit depth and all that stuff, but it is able to put out a pretty strong signal and a strong image that can be captured by the Ninja recorder. And all the data is there. The challenge, yeah, it was just nobody's shot a full feature-length film on the FX3 before. So, you know, FOTOKEM, yeah, really were tasked with that challenge of going in and figuring out, like, okay, well, what is this? What does that mean? What color-wise? How does that work? How does everything that we've done for the Venice and the Alexa and all this stuff? How do we do this for the FX3? And they solved it. They cracked it. And but all the color is there. You know, it's in that little camera, and I think that's what blew us away so much from the get. Like, the ISO was a big one, but I think it was the color that was the biggest surprise for me, at least, having been unfamiliar with the FX3 prior to Greig mentioning it on the call. Like, oh, by the way, we're shooting on the FX3, and I was like, oh, interesting. I don't know anything about it, and I think as dismissive of it as anybody else would have been at first glance. And then you see the footage, the test footage that they had already shot on it. And Greig had shot some commercials, I think, on it as well, that was just testing the workflow. And it looked great.
You know, it was really funny, actually. I was shooting, I did a test with it in Spain on a job, on a commercial in Spain. And the first AD was just about to go off and do Jonathan Glazer's film. I'd be keen. I think that they were thinking of going in the same path, but I don't think I don't know what cameras they used on Zone of Interest.
They ended up using the Venice too. You're talking about Zone of Interest.
Yeah.
They made them, but I think it was similar, like, to, oh, this would be really small because we're going to hide 14 cameras in the set and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I definitely had some discussions because I was testing that camera on this particular shoot, actually, and so he went, he had the same kind of ideas, and I think put that over to those guys.
I have a question about interactive lighting, because there's so much of it in this movie, and I want to know, where do you have to sort of tie in? Because it's always a question when we're doing VFX where there are added things that are going to add lighting to the shot. Talk to me, because I remember even from the first trailer being like, this is one of the coolest shots of just these bodies, these seals, you know, coming out of the water with, like, you know, the big light. Talk to me in terms of some of this interactive lighting, because it exists throughout the whole movie, and it is even in one of your shots, Gareth. And this is slightly different, but you could talk to maybe in dovetail into this shot where all the lights go off in a checkpoint, and, you know, where, you know, and those kind of things, and the challenges that those presented for both you, Oren, and also Gareth. And maybe what you learned from your VFX background and the movies you had done before about what's possible and what you need on set to make it possible.
This one's a lo-fi solution again, which is we were at a real checkpoint. It's actually not a checkpoint; it's a toll road sort of payment, you know, section, and we could control these lanes, you know, on one side from, like, I can't remember now, but like midnight till 4 a.m. or something. And so we're up against it, you know, trying to film everything. And we what we definitely couldn't do is switch off the power. And so basically when the lights go off, there's the AD on the speaker, microphone, and also, like, in Thai doing a countdown, and everybody in the cars, all the drivers,
shut off.
yeah. It's like 3, 2, 1, and everyone just turns all their lights off. Everyone who's near a light switch turns it off, and it's a little bit out of sync, and it kind of gives it a nice feeling. And then ILM turned off a few more lights that we couldn't control in the deeper background, you know, and so it was a quite cheap effect.
If you watch closely, watch the police officer. You can see him click the flashlight off.
Yeah.
But you would never look at him because you're looking at Alfie, so the effect works. But it just goes to show that the little, it's very lo-fi, but it totally works.
Yeah. I see it now.
So because that was all part of the countdown, and everybody turns off their lights. But it was amazing. I mean, this was a big challenge. I remember when we scouted this, and there's this whole bit where she turns off all the lights, and we weren't sure how to do it because we couldn't control the street lights. And this knowing that ILM could always augment it later and add to the effect, it was kind of amazing how just the simple act of turning off all the car lights did most of the work. because it's such a simple way to do it. But yeah, I mean, the whole structure of the checkpoint is CG, so it's they were able to control the lights on that.
Yeah, the upper part up here. Yeah.
The upper part, because it's laid on top of an existing toll booth.
Going back to that question about interactive lights, though, I think because we missed the first 2 frames on the top, which I think are really important.
Yeah, I'm just really curious how they're done because they're awesome. And you have, and now also dovetail into so much of your sort of work is done seemingly at either dusk or maybe that's the 10,000 ASA, just digging in. It's the thing that I always wanted out of night, which was to be able to see separation in the deep background from mountains and those kind of things. Like you see what's happening deep back here. You do that throughout the movie in such a wonderful way that I was like, is that you're shooting in a small window or is that literally 10,000 and there's just enough to dig out some of that separation from night sky?
No, yeah, we I don't know how in Thailand, because of where we were on the hemisphere, however that stuff works,
Yeah.
you get very limited twilight, and it was like 15 minutes. It felt like from when it started to look good on camera to when it's like you get up.
Right.
And so we had 15. So whenever, say we were doing a night shoot, and I can't remember this exactly, but it's all a blur now. But say like we would shoot we'd always shoot at sunset. You know what I mean? Like it was criminal to turn up and not shoot sunset, no matter what we were doing. You know, you just get beautiful light. We've got to do something. So we'd always usually shoot like towards the end of the day, have a sunset, definitely twilight, because we needed to bank as many of that stuff as we possibly could. And then we'd do a bit of a night shoot. And a lot of days were like this, where it'd be a little bit of day towards the end of the day, you know, sunset, twilight, night shoot. And like that was mainly how we tried to.
By the way, that's how all movies should be shot, by the way. It should be on a split from 2 p.m. until midnight or whatever it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's great. And you I don't know, there's something about it that feels more relaxed and sane. But what happens then is you've got this 15-minute window. And so essentially you're trying to do everything like you're talking about, that where you might care about seeing a distant mountain or the horizon. So all your big wide shots. So like say your shot list or whatever you're thinking of doing that night shoot, you're just ring fencing like, okay, these are the really big numbers where we're going to really want to see depth. And we'll try and do those and we'll rehearse them slightly and then just go for it. Not cut. Usually like for that whole 15 minutes, we're not cutting, just quickly resetting. Everyone stand here. Okay, now do that. Okay, everyone quick over here, do that. So it basically this one, as they're coming out the water, was one of those twilights. And I probably went about it the wrong way in that, like, I think, Oren, were you over there? You were setting it up whilst I was doing something else. And then I came over and joined you. I can't really remember.
I think we did this over two different twilights. Like there was one where I was at the beach and you were at the house doing twilight stuff there, and then there was another night where we switched, and I did twilight stuff at the house and you went down to the beach. So it's a mix of 2 days, I think.
And so this is no lighting whatsoever apart from on their flashlights. You want you know to be able to see that difference, but that beam in the background is, you know, obviously ILM.
Yeah, so okay, dovetail from that into this one here, because you have so many interactive gunplay and laser play and all that throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
And obviously LLM can do a certain amount, but Oren, were you ever sort of tasked with, you know, in the small apartments and stuff with like sort of augmenting, or it's hard to time it out sometimes and it's like, well, we can't time out.
Again, we sort of took a bit of a lo-fi approach to it. Like the big blue projector, actually that was something we talked about doing with the physical projector. We had a whole the pattern that Nomad projects. Like Gareth at some point had worked with somebody to create an animation of that. So we had that asset and we tested projecting it with the projector, like so you could actually see it interacting with the people's faces. But for that bit where they come out of the water, it was just unrealistic. Like we couldn't get the projector out there. We actually at some point entertained the idea of flying it on a drone. So you could fly the projector hung upside down on the drone. But it's one of those things where, especially at blue 15 minutes, because we can't call it blue hour, it's blue 15 minutes. In blue 15 minutes, there was no time to deal with stuff like that. We had to just shoot. So that idea went out, and that interactive lighting is all ILM. For gunfire, this bottom right shot, I think you'll probably see it better. We did do interactive lighting, and it was really simple. It was usually just, we would do chase sequences with Asteratubes, and we would just kind of throw them down. So like you can, if you really look closely at the ground, you can sort of see it. We had tubes taped to the inside of the railing, and then we would put a few in the background in the trees as well. So you would never see the light source, obviously, but you would see the kind of machine gun like effect of the lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And then ILM added the laser fire, and that was always the plan. Like that was always the idea. Gareth would always talk about the laser fire. So it was actually, this was inspired by something you guys did on Rogue, I think, because Greig, you and I talked about it, about doing this exact effect.
Yeah,
and then we talked about
Vader scene on
the Vader scene in the hallway.
Yeah,
exactly, because it's the same thing, and you had lights hidden in the walls, right?
Well, so we exactly on the set piece on that one, we had them hidden in the walls, which means we sequenced them so that the lighting effect would take place, and then ILM would paint out the lights. So that was a similar idea, in that we could run lights that were either in shot or nearly in shot. There's little dots on the wall you can see that look like props, or they look like they're in camera. Sorry, in set design, but they actually sequence when they start shooting lasers to create the kind of movement of light effect, as well as the sparks and the hits and all that stuff. It's a bit of a mess of light. That's what's good about moving light. It's a mess. Your brain can't often tell what's going on as long as it's moving.
Yeah, when they ask you to make it really precise, I'm always like, in a way, this is where the VFX overlap is actually really helpful, because you're like, well, you're going to control it at the edit. You're going to control where you need it to hit.
Yeah, Larry, if you go in the creator to the there's a little shootout in the apartment that happens. It's like halfway through the movie.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
And it's the same thing, because SFX are also doing sparks. It's basically the same effect that Greig was just describing. Like it just becomes this mess of visual chaos. And then once ILM adds in the laser fire, it just brings it all together. If you actually paused it and went frame by frame, it wouldn't really make sense. But
well, this is where I was wondering, because it's in the apartment and there's a lot going on and you're in a fixed place.
Yeah.
Where is this? Is this in just like an
apartment? Well, it's a restaurant kind of place in Bangkok.
Yeah, it's a rooftop restaurant on a at the top of a hotel. But actually, Larry, if you pause, you can see one of the lights. ILM didn't get a chance to remove everything, but just keep going through. It's on the floor on the bottom left.
Yeah, I see it there, right there.
So there was like 7 or maybe 9. I should remember exactly, but there was a bunch of other vendors as well as ILM who worked on the VFX of the film, did an amazing job. And it'd be my bad if a light was never painted out, because people would bring it up and I'd say, don't worry about it. In that opening scene, there's some lights that are like, people have lights in houses, right?
Yeah.
Like you walk in a house and there's lights, right? That's how you see stuff at night. And so the idea that you got to paint out lights, and
right.
And it's like, well, they have that. How are we looking at them? They've got a light in their corner.
It's also, now we have the benefit of going frame by frame on things we never did when it was 30 years ago.
No, and that's the thing. When you play the shot, you would never catch that there's a tube in the shot, because it's all part of this visual chaos of the lighting flickering.
Of course.
Plus the sparks, and yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about, I guess, the Vader scene and also the definitely the nightclub scene you showed earlier.
Yeah.
Is that, and it's a very subtle difference, but you go, okay, here's the 2 things we really like. We like red, right? Because it's moody, it's evocative of nightclubs or, Darth Vader or whatever. And then but it's red only has value when there's white light in there as well, right? So we need a little bit of white somewhere to make it feel red. Otherwise it looks like you put a toffee wrapper over the whole scene. So you need white as well. Problem is, you start putting white and red in the same scene, it goes pink. It looks shit. Right. And so what we had to do the whole time is imagine like an A and a B. And so whatever the A setting is of the white light doing whatever it's doing, and the B setting of the red light, they can't be on at the same time. So it's like, it's doing this basically. So you're not getting frames where it's pink, in theory, you're getting either pure reds or pure whites. And because when the 2 go together, it just suddenly looks terrible. And it's something you don't think about until you do it, and you go, why does this look so rubbish? And then you go, oh fuck yeah, we got to like never put them together, but like make mental.
Yeah. Together, and in this scene also, this is another FOTOKEM shout out, this sequence, because we shooting at 12,800 ISO, we wanted to get the glow of the city from outside of these big windows, which was sort of the whole point of this location, was to get the cityscape outside. But in original iterations of it, it was hard to kind of get away from that toffee wrapper feel because we obviously couldn't control the color temperature of anything. The lights outside, the red lasers inside, it was all, we had to kind of go with what we had. And FOTOKEM were able to go in and separate it so well. So there's that, the blue outside is just so nice, and it creates this really great color separation that wasn't necessarily there.
I think to Oren's point, I think the huge shout out to the FOTOKEM team and Dave Cole, colorist, because you're right. Like when you choose a camera that doesn't have the professional backup that a prosumer camera has, it kind of lands in the lap of the guys at the end of the pipe, you know. And so for them to have done that with such, you know, finesse, I think it's incredible.
All right.
Yeah,
I know we're running late on time, and you guys are amazing. I have two. This just because it was in my thing too, and it's a big night scene.
So this is a good example of, it's obviously lit because it's nighttime, right? And we have a big light in the air. But what happened is we were setting up something else, and so the light was on for something else. I can't remember, with John David, I think, coming out of the hatch or some such thing, and they were setting up an explosion, or I can't remember what. But there was something like, you're gonna have to wait 20 minutes. It's gonna be like 25 minutes before such and such is ready. And I felt like this is a crime. You know, we can't just stand here and do nothing. And so I was like, is Madeline around? And I could see her, I can't remember, but it's like, Madeline, just let's go mess around over here. So we took Maddie, and it was just me, Maddie, and I guess the AC, and I didn't know where we were going to use it, and it wasn't lit for this. Like the lights were just on anyway, because like to the left, people are doing shit, setting up the next shot. And so I'm just walking behind Maddie, and I'm just saying, look back, and she would just stop and look back, and I go, okay, carry on. Look back, and she would look back. And she just, and I just did that a few times, grabbed a little grab bag of little moments like that, forgot about it, carried on, right? And then we were in the edit, and Hank was cutting something and landed on this shot in the dailies. And he went, oh, that's nice. And I went, yeah, man. I was like, well, the whole reason I wanted to make this film was because I had this idea of, you know, what would it be like if you were creating in a factory and you saw the world for the first time? You suddenly got outside and it's like, what the hell is this? So he started trying to generate this little sequence, and it's one of my favorite bits in the film now. And it's like, but it wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like, it was just an opportunistic moment that created something good. You know, it could have equally failed and been never seen ever again. And it's like, that ability to just chance stuff and go like, and not have people go, where are you going? What's going on with Madeline? Hang on, what, stop. Like, but people going, oh, they're going off and doing something crazy. And you're allowed to just shoot, and no one asks any questions. And that allowed for all these, like, probably the best moments in the film are those kind of moments where, I mean, what's what you're always looking for as a filmmaker is, the worst case scenario is the film is only as good as you imagined, you know, and you should always be able to get there because you can see it, right? Let's go get that. The best case scenario is it's better than you imagined. And that happens when you let shit smash up your sandcastle, and you then have to rebuild it. And sometimes it's better, you know, than what you pictured. And I get really excited when we're on location. You're always trying to create these conditions where you have a plan, you have an idea, you have your visual references, you've all had a million conversations, and then you just want something to fuck it, you know. And like DNA, it's like, you know, there's your DNA, and then you've got some other DNA, and it creates a new organism that's you know, evolved from what it was. And so whatever that other DNA is sometimes it's the DOP, sometimes it's the weather, sometimes it's the actor, sometimes it's something totally random, but you want to get infected and you want something to destroy what, like, it's exciting when it goes wrong. It's exciting when, in a weird way, when you have no limitations, it's really scary and depressing. And when someone suddenly goes, you can't do that or that or that or that, you know, it suddenly becomes like a sport where you're like, and you know, you're stepping up to bat, and you've got and no one in the world has ever not had a light or not had an actor and not had a, like, let's see how they can deal with this one, you know what I mean? And you go, what, I'm going to try and knock it out of the park, right? Because it's like those limitations, no one's expecting you to succeed now, right? Because it's a, you know, this nightmare has happened, and that gets exciting because you go, and now we can be heroes, you know, now we can do something, you know, that wasn't what anyone, you know, expects. And so like these little moments like this where I don't even know if people knew we were filming, but it was like we just walked off with Madeline and just shot some stuff, and the fact it wasn't lit, I mean, there's things technically wrong with this, I guess, but the fact it was like found rather than like, let's sculpt this with light and bounce light, and it was just, imagine there was a moon, now what looks good, probably this. I love all that stuff. And
but I think that also speaks, Gareth, sorry to interrupt you, but that speaks to your ability to use your instinct on how something feels. Because you're right, it wasn't lit for this, but you put her in there and you probably went, she's too front lit, go, what about there? Oh yeah, okay, turn around. Oh, that's the perfect light bounce. It's the perfect eye glance. You know, like it was like planned at the time, you know what I mean? You probably put it in a position. It wasn't luck, is what I'm saying. Like, I think there's an element of luck to have found that, but you put her in the right spot. That thankfully there was no one with a, you know, craft service tray walking through the background, right? But I think it's skill to be able to feel it out and get the right mood from the place as well. And yeah.
Well, it also seems like the entire structure that you put in place for making the film allowed for this opportunity, right? Because you had the ability to just grab Madeline and say, let's shoot a shot.
Yeah.
And shoot a shot opportunistically while somebody else was continuing to work, you know?
Exactly. And how this is lit is also, it's designed to allow for this opportunity. Like the lighting is in these scenes is intentionally broad strokes in order for it not to feel refined. Like we just had a few, it's very basic. It's just a few lights up in lifts. It's aperture 1200s. And we had a few of them set up for different directions. And the only thing that we would do is kind of just turn off the one that looked flat and fronty whenever we were looking in that direction. And just otherwise let them kind of do what they do. It wasn't super refined and it wasn't super precise. It was just, you know, like finding the opportunity, the opportunistic moments. And then I'm writing exposure on a little dial on a tilted nucleus with a variable ND. And then that's it. Like that's how the shot kind of falls into place, as opposed to trying to build each specific moment and have it feel so bespoke. But then it can feel too false. It can feel artificial.
Yeah.
And that thing that Greig mentioned earlier, where every image has a flaw, you know, or some imperfection in it. Like we would talk about that all the time, because sometimes we would light something and it would feel too perfect. And then we would say, it's too well placed. We have to mess it up a little bit. Or we would always talk about, you know, getting, like if we got lucky, like maybe even the interactive laser lights and the sparks is such a great example. It's the same thing. It's like, we're just going to set up this scenario, or the lighting in the nightclub. We're going to set up these scenarios. And then if we get lucky, we're going to get these moments where it all aligns. And you can't plan for that. You have to sort of just create the environment for it to potentially happen, and then dig, and then just keep shooting and digging until it aligns, and then hope that those are the moments that end up in the edit, which they do, because Gareth and the editors are all thinking about that and making sure that, you know, you don't want the super flawed moments that don't work in the film, even though maybe some of them do end up in there, but nobody else notices.
Something we haven't talked about is Nancy. We went with this approach of like, because we were going to be like 360 or at least 180 in a lot of environments, and as you well know, there's an ideal place for a key light, or whatever you want to call that main light, that's hitting someone on their face, and it can be too frontal, that looks shit around here, looks good here, can't really see their face here. So this is like sweet spot of an angle, but you need to be here, right? Because of the story or with the performance or something. And so rather than having this situation where, you know, you light a scene and then we have to move the stand with this, you know, the light, and 15 minutes go by and we were like, LEDs are so damn light now, you know, and we're shooting at 12,800. This is another thing that 12,800 allowed. We've got such lightweight LEDs, like, can't we just, like, we have a boom operator, can't we have someone holding the light, you know, so we don't have a stand? So like when we suddenly move around here, that person can suddenly move and put the light back in the right position for that moment. And so Nancy was our best boy. And essentially one of the benefits of COVID was we all had to wear masks. And it allowed, weirdly, for a little system where I had a microphone in my mask and I couldn't hear anyone, but I could say something if I felt like, you know, I'm going to go over there, or so I could give them a heads up, or if something was bugging me, like I want to go there, but there's a light in shot, be like, you know. And so like, and then Oren was talking to everybody on headsets, and I could sometimes, like, I could feel like, you know, like it was quite interesting. It happened with Greig on Rogue One, and it happened with Oren on this, where I would move, I would get like what felt like a pretty good composition, like, oh, this feels right. And the lighting was good. And then as I'm watching the shot, it's getting better. And then like a minute or two in, I'm like going, oh, this looks really nice. Did it look that nice when I came over here? And it's rather than like killing the shot, like they can change the levels, they can turn a light off and bring that one up. But the idea was like everything has to be usable. So don't switch anything off. Like just do it like in a really gentle way, you know, and just bring the lights back to the right level. And so all this shit's going on whilst, you know, I'm oblivious to it every time. But it was like your move looks pretty good. And then a minute in, it's like, oh, it looks really good. And I wouldn't know or understand what just happened. But I mean, Oren, you can speak to that because that was you being really busy with the iPad stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's basically what you just described. Like it was just constantly, I mean, it was pretty amazing. It required a mind meld between all of us, you know, and trust on set from Gareth, trust from Greig, you know, that while we were kind of fucking around on location, like we were going to get the stuff that we set out to get and the stuff that we had all talked about in prep and that we planned for. And in the end, it's this alchemy when it all aligns. And I guess it just goes back to what I mentioned before. Like the hope is just where the moments where it doesn't align, where it's earlier in the take and it still doesn't, it looks shitty, that, you know, you don't use that part of the take in the film. And if something does end up, then that's where Dave and FOTOKEM can come in and help us adjust the shape of you know, the contrast ratio on the face or whatever to get it to the place where, well, if we did light this is where we would have kind of shifted it to. But it's all little subtleties like that. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important that no lights went off and on. It wasn't like things had to dim because for that exact reason. Because if the key moment was during a lighting change and we couldn't talk Gareth out of it, taking it out of the film, then we had to fix it and we had to do a dynamic or something on it. But I think what's good, and I didn't see this in Thailand, but you know, it's a little bit like a duck swimming. You know, above the water, you don't notice a thing, which is the intention. Is on set with the camera and the actors, they don't notice a single thing. You know, but in the background, there's people going, "Oh, do that!" They're screaming and yelling, and you know, quietly on set.
But well, we were whispering, but yeah. we couldn't blow a take with audio, but
yeah, one of the things that also I appreciated, because it was a little different than maybe what I had imagined talking to Oren a bit before the movie came out about the process, was with you operating on a gimbal, very small camera, massive like ability to go 360 and keep shooting and all the things that you wanted to do in the film. This idea that it was going to somehow feel, I don't know, either very long takes, uncut, or sloppy. But the movie feels actually really sort of beautifully sort of designed and covered. And I guess sometimes you think, well, I want this flexibility, but it's not because I'm actually showing it all in one take. I'm just doing it so that the momentum just carries on and I don't have, is that sort of, because it's not like they're all sort of like big 360, you know, that where you see like what the world has been provided for you, you know, in every shot.
I think there's two main reasons to do it, or I like to do it, is that The first one is the annoyance of when you say cut. Like, you can actually play this game on set, you know, and you can say, okay, we're just going to cut for a minute. Okay, cut. And I swear to God, if I didn't say anything or complain, 20 minutes would go by. You know what I mean? Like, you just look at your watch and go, not say, because everyone goes, oh, they're stopping, what to do? It's just 1 minute thing. Okay, I can do my 1 minute thing. I'm going to move this thing. And then someone, oh, what's he doing? He's moving that thing. Okay, I'm going to back up the truck, move the trucks now. You can do the thing. And then everyone starts upping each other by like 30 seconds to, and everyone just starts doing tasks that take longer and longer. And honestly, you can just kiss goodbye to 20 minutes by saying cut if you didn't like start shouting a little bit.
Have you ever heard the adage, it's not the time it takes to take the time, it's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time, it's the time between the takes that takes the time? Yeah. Whatever, that's basically what you're saying, yeah.
That's easy for you to say, yeah.
Exactly, but it's really true. It's the time when you yell cut between the next roll that is like...
What would drive me crazy is, and it's funny, my girlfriend's just directed her first film, and she would come back and say things, and it would be like, oh my God, that's what I used to say all the time, is that if you look at the pie chart of what gets time on a film set, you know, typically, and it would drive me crazy. You'd go onto a film set, and I would have to, as a director, I would have to wait because this cable has to come, and we've got to move this light, and we've got to do the other thing, and you'd be patient because, you know, everyone's great at their job, and like, so you go, yeah, okay, and you wait, and like the 70 to 80% of the pie chart is now taken up of the hour. And then it's like, okay, we're ready. We're good to go. Okay, good. Okay, go, Gareth. And you would do a couple of takes or a few takes. And when you got to like take 3 or 4, you really got this vibe of like, you know,
exactly.
Why is it taking you so long? And you're like, the wire, the cable had longer than me. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not selling cable to people in cinemas, right? We're making a film. Why is the making of the film, the shooting of it, given so little time and everything else? Anyway, so I learned early on, I was very lucky, I got to visit a big film set, and it was Peter Jackson, and he didn't say cut, and he basically was explaining that it's like, I don't know, it's like Pablo's Dogs or whatever it's called, where the crew is not allowed to move until the word cut. Like, they're all trained. It's the one thing it's like you get fired if you came in and no one had said cut. So if you never say cut, no one can come in. And so basically you just go reset and you don't say the word cut, and everything resets. No one's allowed to come in, no touch-ups, nothing. You do another take, reset, do another take. So there's that reason as to why, you know, you do long takes, right? Because it just keeps the day, it makes the day possible. And then the other reason is, I think actors, no offense to anybody, but what happens is an actors can come to like loaded with, they've done their prep, they've done their homework, they've got something as a safety net, like if, you know, they know what they might do in this scene. And usually I find quite often the first take, it feels contrived, it feels a bit what everyone thought they should do. And if like in that take, someone naturally ends up over here, like not what they were expecting at the end of the take, and then you just quickly say, okay, go again. And they aren't able to get up and start where they thought they could start from. And now they're sat down on a chair and the scene's beginning again. They're like, oh, fuck. And they don't want to say anything because they don't look bad in front of the other actor. And so they just have to go for it, and they have to let go of everything that they had in mind. And suddenly this much more natural thing starts to happen. And so it's annoying to everyone, but it weirdly starts to find, like, I'd say after 3 or 4 takes, it finds this very naturalistic, like real and authentic, you know, and all those words. Like the best takes, I think, are like 4 and 5 and 6, you know, and that's usually what I'm grabbing from in the edit, you know, and take 1 and 2 is more like a shoot the rehearsal type thing, and technically,
yeah,
you know, Oren's figuring out the light and let the actors get that first pass out of their system, and then it starts to get interesting and not what anyone predicted, and I can only get there personally by crazy long takes. And like the very first day, the very first take, I think it was, I'm very unaware, like the camera's heavy.
What was that day and take? What was the scene? Do you remember?
It was in the
Drew's factory.
the factory where they make, like, where Drew and his has the workshop, and they're making simulants, and he meets.
They're making the robots in the machines.
Where there's like that great shot of the women on the assembly line just laughing where they like
Yeah.
etch the thing into there. I love that scene. That's also one of those world building things that I appreciated so immensely.
No, it was just we did a take, and I'm not aware of this, and there's so much pressure on that first thing, but I think it ended, and we turned around and someone said that was a 25-minute take, and basically we had like shot the scene, I don't know, like 12 times probably from different angles, and I wasn't happy in terms of like, it's the first time you've done anything on the film, and there's a lot of stress, but it was I think it just set the agenda of like, this is how we're going to roll. It's going to be 360. We're going to go for 25 minutes. You better not be in shot. And the actors are just going to have the freedom to do anything they want and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with Greig and then Oren, and then I have a last question for Gareth. This has been amazing. All right, Greig, what'd you learn from this film? We learned something from every movie we make. What'd you learn?
Well, listen, I think the big takeaway for me was that this is a culmination of everything I thought was possible with filmmaking that I hadn't previously done. So, in meeting Gareth on Rogue, it was like a meeting of the minds, definitely, but we were both still making a film that was a big film. Like, we were doing a big film. It was a machine, and it was great, and it was an amazing franchise, but it was still a machine. And there are some things we got to do on Rogue that I thought we've never been able to do on a big film, like some small units, some small breakaway crews, but it wasn't. We didn't get to make that the way that we both thought that films could be made. Not necessarily should be made, because I think that it's horses for courses. Different films should be made in different ways. But the fact that this hadn't been done like this on a mainstream movie seemed like ridiculous. Like, it seemed like low-hanging fruit. Like, why wouldn't you do a film like this? Like, for us, it was like so logical and so clear. This is a way to make a great film, but it didn't seem like many people shared that opinion. So for me now, the great takeaway is now I can point to this film and say, well, we did that like this. Why can't we do something else like that? Like, why can't I shoot on a prosumer camera for a big film that it has an IMAX reel? Like, why not? Tell me why. So for me, what it did is it did exactly what Gareth said about the ratio. Like, it sets a precedent for this is what is possible, not necessarily how it should be done, because everybody has a different way of doing it. But it's a mainstream movie with scope and scale, with a vision beyond its budget, and it's been done the way that a low budget film gets made. I mean, in this day and age, why not? And we proved that we could do it. So that, to me, is the big takeaway.
I think I really learned the power of collaboration and trust more than anything that I'd worked on before, because I don't know, coming from indie films, like I know, Gareth, your first movie was low budget. Larry, Greig, I know you guys also came from this world originally. It often feels like trust is it's a hard commodity to come by when you're doing smaller films, because it's like, well, the only person I could really trust is myself and my experience. And sometimes on smaller films, like, you really have to come in and bring from your experience. Like, often the DP on like small indie films is like the most experienced person on the set. And you're working with first-time directors and first-time producers and stuff like that. And that's not to throw anybody under the bus or to say that there's anything wrong with that. Like, that's sort of just the nature of the beast. Stepping into a project of this scale for the first time in my career, and working with Gareth and Greig, and having that trust from them in the first place, which was just a whole surreal and amazing thing that we could also talk about another time, really, I don't know, just opened my eyes to how important that is in the filmmaking process. And not just the trust between the three of us, but also every other department. Like, the experience of this shoot was unlike anything I had before, even with the producers, the AD department, the SFX, like everybody, visual effects, obviously, everybody was experienced, creative, smart, and was on board. Going back to what Greig was saying before about like getting the right people, everybody was on board with how we were going to make this film, and it was very unorthodox and it was very unique and challenging and physically challenging and technically challenging. And just seeing that all work and seeing that collaboration and the interpersonal communications and everything was really something special. And now that's something that I feel it's tough. I mean, I feel spoiled by this project because it was such a good experience in that regard. Like working with a director like Gareth and somebody who is so holistic in the overall view of everything. Like it's going to be a rare thing. I mean, I think it's going to be a challenge moving forward to kind of slot into other filmmaking styles because this one was so rewarding ultimately. And yeah, just working with that approach and that mentality of like, well, if something goes wrong or if something isn't quite right or if something isn't perfect, like that's good. That's what we want, and that's where we thrive. And even though it feels uncomfortable in that moment, because in other circumstances you might be worried about how is this being perceived, or or did I fuck up or whatever, it wasn't like that. And I think that's just the most fertile ground for creativity that I've experienced so far on a film, and I think I'm just going to always be striving for that in the future.
Gareth, what did you learn? Did it fulfill what your hope was from returning to your monster's way of making a movie? And did you learn something you didn't think?
Yeah, it definitely got to a place that I don't feel we fully bullseyed it, but got closer to that holy grail hybrid of guerrilla meets blockbuster that I've always wanted to try and do. This is definitely like the closest to the bullseye, but without being a bullseye that I've ever had chance to do. But the excitement is, oh man, I want to get that bullseye, like because I think that's probably what I learned, is that you can get a bullseye, right? We didn't, like, would never say we did, but it felt like, I mean, I'm very excited about the future after this film. Like, there's a lot of technology coming around the corner, as we all know, AI and things like that, and everything that sort of succeeded in this film was sort of the lo-fi stuff, the kind of prosumer, the stuff that's supposed to fail. And it's like, I remember early on, nothing to do really with this film, but I went to had a little tour around a virtual studio in LA here, and they had a poster up on the wall, and it was basically how a movie's made, and it was like all like a little Venn diagram thing going down of like, this is pre-production, and it just everything. And it was just kind of like, and I kind of was looking at it thinking, this is so obvious. Why do they have this poster up? Why have they got? I don't get it. And the guy who ran the place went, "Oh, you're looking at the poster," and I was like, "Yeah," like thinking, "Wow, so what?" And he goes, "Yeah," he goes, "That's over 100 years old, that poster." And I kind of looked and I realized the font and I was like, oh my God, we have not changed this process in a century. Like, this is embarrassing. When you look at all of the industries and how much they move, especially something as technological as filmmaking, the fact that we have a fucking clapperboard, like this, the chevron thing, making a flat, like we have time code. Why are we doing that? And so there's all these things that are going on in filmmaking that when you're an amateur and you don't know how a film's made, when you just watch movies and you grow up as a kid and you go, I really want to do this, I wonder how I can do this. And you have assumptions, I bet you could do that. Maybe they do that. Maybe it could just be this. And then you go and you go to film school, wherever it is, when you first hit that brick wall of like, no, this is how it's done. And it's this very deflating feeling, or for me it was, of like, oh, and it becomes more like building a house, and it got more in common with being in construction and accounting and, and not all this dreamy, inspiring things you had as a child. And I think one by one, you think to yourself, well, all those things, those assumptions I had must be wrong, because I bet you they've tried them all and they failed gloriously, and they're doing this for a reason. And then you get in the door and you start playing with the toys, and one at a time you go, why are we doing that? Shouldn't we do this instead? And one of them happens by accident, and it kind of works, and you go, oh, and then you try another one, oh, and you start to realize, and I think if this film has taught me anything, it's that I don't think any of those things that exist are right, you know. And I think if you're at home watching this and you're a filmmaker and you're like, I've got these gut feeling that if I did this, this, and this, and this differently, or if this was my way of making a film, it just feels more right to me. Like that would work. Like, go do it, because every time we did that on this film, we had a win, you know. And so I'm really excited about pushing this further and going for broke, you know, one more time, and just trying to make a film the way that you think a film should be made, because it's all going to change anyway. Like in the next 10 years, it's going to be unrecognizable, the landscape of filmmaking and theatrical and all that, because of AI and everything that's around the corner. So
I hope so, but if that 100-year diagram is any clue, sometimes it moves slower than you think. Yeah, exactly.
Right now, though, right now there's a bit of a speed up, though. As Gareth said, I agree with him. Like,
yeah,
with obviously films like this one, but also with auteurs, filmmakers that are taking control right now, with you know, AI, with 3D, like we talked about Unreal. Like, there's so many opportunities to make movies, and we're going to see some filmmakers in the next 10 years that are coming from very different backgrounds.
Yeah, well, that's for darn sure. And I do think it's the rule breakers that end up setting the new rules and set up the new precedent. And I love that this film broke those rules, and that it was at least near the bullseye of what you intended by creating just a different paradigm for making a big budget movie and a big scopy, you know, science fiction movie for a big screen, you know, and do it in a way that's not just following the path of least resistance that we all are susceptible to, you know. Well, anyway, thank you guys for this talk. This was one of the most enjoyable ones, as I expected. And
thanks, Larry.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. It's inspiring, and again, I like it because it continues to sort of say this is possible, to not just take the path we keep taking out of inertia. Well, Creator will be up soon, and yeah, you should see it. If you haven't seen it, it's on Blu-ray now, and check it out and watch it in whatever format you can now. I'll say this one last thing, because every movie is a product of when it comes out. And when the movie begins, as I watched it while the strike was still going on, ChatGPT was 6 months into its release, or 8 months by that point. It felt very prescient, and it felt like, oh, including even like there's time, like a Times Square they're walking through, which is like, donate your likeness.
Yeah.
And it was like, starts to think about the strike that just ended, and the AI things that are ahead of us, and how this movie sets you squarely in that world that's in the near future, and maybe closer than this movie takes place 40 years from now. So think about that at home when you watch this, because there's a lot of big ideas here, which is what makes movies really fun. All right, thank you guys. We'll see you on the next one.
thanks, Larry. Cheers.
10 years ago today, the artificial intelligence created to protect us detonated a nuclear warhead in Los Angeles.